Hello, thank you for that introduction. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Yes, today I'll be talking about building accessible apps for everyone, and that is with React. So let's go ahead and talk a bit about myself. So I'm a web engineer working at Vanguard, and I'm also a Google developer expert. And I'm one of the organizers at React India. And So to say, this has been a very pleasant journey and a pleasant opportunity today talking here. Talking about Vanguard, Vanguard is the only large asset management company that is wholly owned by its investors and has no owners and shareholders, which means this client-owned structures helps us to focus on the best outcomes for our clients. One of the comments which you will always hear at Vanguard is this good for our client? Is this good for our product? And we're growing also in Europe, Australia, and Asia. At the same time, what I would like to say is, if you're looking for jobs, we're looking for talents every moment. So just go and have a look at that page. What we believe is all the users have equal access to information and functionality regardless of ability, which means what we believe is, we have a quite good accessibility awareness at our companies, and we have a lot of ambassadors who are spreading awareness about accessibility in general. So definitely worth checking this link. What we ensure is all our investors can access our products and services to help them reach their financial goals. And being a financial service, working at a financial service, we're also very much focused on technology and accessibility at the same time. So you can actually say that from the numbers itself, we are around 7,000 people globally working in the technology department. So today what I'll be covering is, we'll be going through what is accessibility in general, what are the common practices, how would you handle forms, how would you handle errors, how would you go through images and icons in React. We'll be also seeing how animations can be bad sometimes, and we'll be going through some of the tools that we could use as a part of testing accessibility. So quickly, one thing I always say that accessibility is not a barrier to innovation. In fact, it's it's an innovation to web because you're kind of building and including everyone to use your product. So, generally speaking, I often hear these terms that, okay, accessibility with React, frameworks are ruining uh, sort of accessibility stuff, but that's not really the case because under the hood, you're still writing JSX, which is HTML. So that is never the case. Firstly, what the question is, why should you even care about it? Why does it matter to you? I mean, from the bottom of my heart, I would say, there are a lot of people in this world. It's not just you, your friends, your grandparents using your website or, the internet. There might be some legal authorities, auditing your website or legal authorities using a website. It's a diverse kind of people using your website. Maybe somebody is having a visual impairment, some might have low vision, some might have cognitive, and you need to serve them all. You need to serve your website to all of them, which means if I talk about stats, so 1 in every 10 users will have some kind of disability. And this is not something by birth, it can also be a situational. And if you don't build an accessible app right now, you might have to see yourself in court sometimes. So let's not do that. I mean, definitely you've heard about a story where, a blind man actually sued Domino's, where he won the case. And, so that might happen to you, or, if you're not following such guidelines. So let's quickly see what is WCAG, which we hear a lot when we talk about accessibility in general. So WCAG is a set of guidelines or the techniques published by working group at Web Accessibility Initiative of World Wide Web Consortium, which means W3C. And right now, we have a working draft already coming up of WCAG 3.0, which is also known as a Silver Project, which will be a draft catering to improve the accessibility of the products on the variety of platforms, including disability needs. And it will also focus more on the technology such as WebXR, augmented reality, voice input. So, which is really great. And the ones that you see below it, AA, and AAA. So these are nothings, but these are like the compliance levels for WCAG 2.1, which means A, AA, AAA. Each of these levels includes certain guidelines that must be met in order to make your website accessible. And these levels are built on three principles: must, should, and could, which means if you want your website to be accessible compliant, level A is a must to meet, and then you should totally achieve AA. Although, reaching AAA is really impossible, but from law's perspective in your country, you should definitely achieve for AA compliance. If not, there'll be so many A's which you have to look forward later. So definitely don't ignore it. Start now, do it, and just do it. Cool. So a report which Web Accessibility in Mind did a random audits on few of the top websites, and what they found out is 98% of the top homepages, I mean these are the top notch websites, and they fail WCAG2 guide. I mean they often fail in this guideline, which means they're not even practicing accessibility on their homepages, which means it is not at all accessible. Which means, what are the common errors and what are the common types of WCAG failures they are facing on their website? So, most common was low contrast text, some missing alternative text, some empty links, empty buttons, missing documents, which could be fixed easily. Now, we'll talk a little bit about how it came from, how it started. For example, a quick introduction about all of these laws. I mean, there's Section 508, there's EDA, there's all of these laws are, constantly monitoring that are you building for everyone. And this is not only in terms of technology. I mean, ADA also makes sure that there's no discrimination against any person on their disabilities, and it's not only in technology, but it also covers employment, transportation, electronic items that you're using. So all of these laws are have already come in, and maybe even if the laws are not there in your country, it might just come. So you should start thinking about it. We all actually have a wrong view of disability. For example, when I started working with accessibility in general, I had a very wrong view. I only thought that it's about blind people, but it's way more beyond that. That means we have a different perception, but it is important to learn that we need to serve a lot of diverse group of audience. So quickly going through the principles of accessibility, which means it should be perceivable, it should be operable, which means functionality is available from a keyboard. Users have enough time to read and use your content. It's understandable. That means your text is readable, content appears and operates wherever it is needed. It is robust, which means we might have some tools coming in future. It should be compatible with that current tools or the future tools. So make sure you're building for everyone, which means we are covering this 4 principles. That means the end goal is still building for everyone, irrespective of what framework it is, whether it's React, Angular, or Vue. And if I talk about React, I have heard a lot of people saying that, yes, React is a library that we should not use, or else we might, not respect the build or accessible websites. I mean, there are a lot of talks going on, but if you go through the docs, the first line itself says that React fully supports building accessible websites, often by using standard HTML techniques, because we are not doing any rocket science. We're just writing HTML under the hood. And nothing can prevent us from building accessible apps, which means there are so many ways to browse the web: keyboard, using magnification tools, mouse stick, or screen readers. So that means accessibility is already built in your browsers. And web is already accessible, right? So, which means it's your job to do it. And as a front end dev, you've already learned HTML, CSS when you were a kid, or when you just started off as a front end developer. So it's your job. That means it's your job to write a semantic HTML from the start. And we have a guide that you could follow and reach to a conformance level AA if you follow this guide. So everything is there with you. It's just you and us as a developer, we need to fix things. So going with some of the general tips, I often believe that we should have like a keyboard shortcuts always, because this is not only good for the keyboard users, but also as a user, if you really want to do something very quick, it would be beneficial for you. Next, we'll see color contrast, which is often the common issues and the first thing that should be resolved when you're taking care of accessibility. And before we go to math, we need to know what contrast ratios we must aim, or we should aim for. So to achieve an ideal review, which is AA conformance level, the contrast ratio for most body text is 4.5:1 and 3:1 for the larger text. So if you see here, the slide shows you that the contrast ratio is pretty good. And here we are using the Chrome DevTools, which gives you sort of hint that, okay, things are good. So it's already inbuilt, just go and use it. You could just see, even if your designer is coming up with some brand colors, as a developer, be responsible. Make sure that you're going through, each of the colors, because sometimes it might create problems. So this is a quick example of bad contrast ratio. And there are tools available already if you want to check your foreground color against your background color. You could quickly check, and it would basically give you what ratio it has, and whether you are following WCAG AA conformance level or not. So the tool that I used before in this slide was contrastratio.com. Definitely, I recommend going through it. What I also say is use battle-tested libraries. In React community, there's often, things needed for like date picker or modals. Just go and see if there is something already built and which is accessible. At the same time, go and use it. One more general tip that I often see is to not style the text to give it a visual appearance, which sometimes we might do to make it look like a heading. You might just give a style. I mean, don't do that, because all of these things are actually very crucial for the screen readers as they go over your page and as they navigate your page. These are the crucial information that they get, that, okay, this is the heading of the page, and it serves a lot of information for them. Always have a light mode or dark mode. I generally prefer dark mode. That's why my slides are also in dark mode. So, I mean, have an option on your website to serve both of them. Talking about accessible skip links, I always say that you should have accessible skip links. Generally, when the keyboard only users are interacting with your website, they use the tab key to navigate between the links. And if you have like so many links at the top of your page, they might just get lost, or it might be annoying for them for the to reach to the main content. It takes so much time, so providing a skip link is always a better solution. And let's quickly see how the code looks like. Okay, so you see here we have like a skip links, which has like a list of links, and we map through the links and we return a link item, right? And the link item is nothing but an A tag, which will take you somewhere. This is a skip link component you could have, but what's the important step? At this step, you see your link item is off screen, which means it will only be seen once you focus. So a best example would be, let's quickly see what is happening. The user comes on the website, press tabs, and you see it pops up, it focuses. Because it is focused, it says skip to main content, and you land on a page where there is a crucial information. So this is really important for the keyboard users, and it should only pop up when you're pressing tab, and only for the keyboard users, and should give a focus. So definitely worth to have a descriptive name for your alt text, which means if I have a picture, if I have this picture, for example, I say two man holding the flag, which is okay. But if I give more description about the picture, because this information might be useful for the screen reader user, it makes sense to give more information. Having unique titles on the page is really important, because you're moving from one page to another, although it's a single page app, but you're kind of moving between the routes, and it's really important. So this is an quick example of the code. You could already use React Helmet on each of your pages, and set a unique title to each of the pages, so that the user who are using a keyboard, for example, or maybe a screen reader user, you know, has this information that where you are actually on the page, or which page you are. So next is, I often say that when you're using React, sort of, when we started off using React, start using fragments instead of div, where, you sort of are giving div only for a reason to not return two adjacent elements from your render method. So start using fragments, because we already have that now, thanks to React community. So start using that. Handling forms, I would cover two things: React required fields, errors, and disabled buttons. So let's quickly see how you would build your input component. So something like this, which means I enter something, and if something is a required field, how would you do that? So if I have to build my input component, what I would do is something like this, which means I have my input component, and here I basically pass all the props that I want to pass. And I say required equal to true. Now let's see how this component looks like. So in the render method, you see if the prop required is passed, which means you've already passed a required prop to it. And now this will be spreaded here, which means your input component is always attached together with a label and the input. So this is how your input component should look like. Next, it's a good example. If you don't have an HTML5 support, explicitly pass area required to it, because it makes when you pass required, at this point, the screen reader users might know that this is a required field. But When you don't have an HTML5 support, it is really important to explicitly mention that, the screen readers, that this field is required. For that, you need to pass area required. So let's say you have a multiple required fields, which, you might sometime have. And it's a very important thing, or also a good idea to, at least inform the user right at the start, saying that, this field marked an asterisk are important, or all the fields marked in the asterisk are important. So as much as information given to the user really makes importance. So this is how the HTML would look like. And yes, so let's move on next. Provide more instructions more often. For example, if you have some field with a specific format, for example, DDMMYY, which means if you have a date, how would you convey that? So a very good example is I'll have an input component, give area labeled by to it, which means you have an area labeled by, and to area labeled by can have multiple IDs given to it. And you see here what is happening is we have a span ID, which gives more information about that label. So now the screen reader will read that date must be DDMMYY format, which gives you more information about that particular field. So area labeled by is intended to identify the element that labels the current element. But how I would do it is other way around, because here we are not really, providing something about that element, but what we are doing is providing more information about this input field, right? So to me, it looks like, we should use area described by, and that's the right way of doing things, because area described by is kind of used when you sort of want to provide more information about that particular label. So, which means I would do something like this. I would have an area described by, which is an ID, and, it's the same thing, but, it makes more sense to use area described by here. As told, area labeled by is intended to identify the element that labels the current element, and area described by should be used when you want to give more information about your field. So how would you handle errors? Let's quickly do that. And definitely providing information whenever there is a validation happening. It's very important that you provide this alert to the screen readers. So turns out that area described by is a perfect for accessible error handling. And let's see how. So quickly we see here we have an input component. We have area described by with an ID of email errors. And all our errors are basically rendered here. And we have like an area invalid, which pops only when there is, only when the error length is greater than 0. So this in this example, what you see is you have an error component which is always attached to your input component, because as a screen reader user, you should have context of where the error is, yes, and what the error belongs to which field. So it makes sense to use area described by here. And how would the errors component look like is something with the role of alert, and wherein you map through the errors and pop up the errors on the field. So what we saw here is area invalid should be used in conjunction with associating an error message field. That's how we did it. How would you handle disabled buttons? Is do not disable them. That's the quick thing. And let's quickly see how you would deal with, action component. So I pass a disabled attribute to it, and you would do something like this. So if it is disabled, you basically pass a disabled attribute to your button. But as said, it's the wrong way of doing it. Don't ever disable a button using a disabled attribute, because disabled buttons is removed from the accessibility tree, which means What you should do is disable the buttons for the screen readers using area disabled and apply the visual styles for preventing touch and click, which you could easily do because you need to apply some sort of CSS saying cursor, not allowed, opacity, pointer events, and apply that class to make it visually look disabled, and apply area disabled so that the screen readers know that this button is disabled. Also about keyboard users, you can quickly apply some JavaScript saying that prevent default for the click events. And yes, are we done? Now that's your job to make it false, because now you need to enable the button at some point in your place. So set area disabled to false, remove the disabled class to make it look enabled, because you might have to increase the opacity, and allow the submit button to trigger the submit JavaScript. That's all. So there might be a times where you would want to pass the disabled attribute. I mean, always have an option of passing allowed disabled, and if you pass it, you would basically disable the button, but it's not a good idea. And having an accessible and visible focus indicator, which means there are several focus indicators already by default, which is present on our interactive elements, which is a link or a button. In that case, do not remove them unless you have an alternative. I mean, just don't, your designers might not like the focus indicators, but I would say do not remove them. Have an alternative, yes, which is a good idea. Have a box shadow, a nice fancy thing, but make sure you have an outline and make it transparent instead of just removing them with outline none, because box shadow sometimes creates problem with dark contrast mode. So when you want to manage your focus from one page to another, make sure you are kind of focusing the page. For example, when you talk about React, you're moving from one page to another with a link which is present with React router. But you need to set focus on the page when you move from one page to another. Set the focus at the right section. For it could be your header, it could be your main section. Just make sure you're focusing your element on that particular page when the page is loaded. Take charge of your focus. Open your favorite website and press tab key or maybe a shift or tab to test if it's keyboard accessible or not. Some dialogues which are already there in the React community, which are accessible, are React area model, React UI dialog model, and React li dialog. So these are already there. You could just go and check them out. Make sure that you always have like a DOM and the visual order in sync. I mean, CSS gives us flexbox, but with using them is also be careful that you're not ruining DOM and visual order, because sometimes it desynchronizes the DOM from the visual order, making the keyboard navigation more difficult. So be careful of that. Also, talking about performance, we all love performance. As a web dev, you always are looking for increasing your page load time. When using content visibility, it enables the user agent to skip an element's rendering work, which is a new thing in CSS. And what it does is, because the rendering is skipped, if a large portion of your content is off screen, it makes the initial load really fast. But everything comes with the responsibility. So make sure that when you're using it, you're using it carefully and not applying it somewhere in the headers or some of the sections that shouldn't really be off the screen, because heading and other content will be suppressed if content visibility is considered off screen. So I recommend keeping the headings and the landmark elements outside of the regions styled with content visibility auto. There's a nice article also written by Marcy Sutton, which you could read about content visibility CSS property. Hiding content, don't do that, please, again, because content will not be visible for screen readers. Instead, what you could do is, have something off screen, which means accessible to the screen readers and hidden from the visual users. right? That's what we want to do when you're using display none. And it looks like something like this, which means you have to apply some sort of CSS to make your content off screen. And this means now it is visually hidden, but still accessible to the screen readers. So you could create a helper as I created before and use it in your CSS wherever you want to. You could also create a component. For example, if you see here quickly, I've created a component, and you could wrap it around with the component you want to visually hide. Self-explanatory CTA is very important. So no more click here links, need to be more descriptive. Visual layer does not need to be that explanatory, which means, sometimes there could be a case where visual layer shouldn't be really, self-explanatory. So make sure you're using the visually hidden component and making sure the screen readers have enough information about that button. Icon, quickly going through icon, how I would design my icon component is pass an icon and pass an label. And my icon component would look something like this, which means if I do not pass a label, I make sure that I apply area hidden to it and focusable as false, because I do not want to focus it. And if you pass a label to it, for example, so you have like a span to it, and the label is actually visually hidden, which means it is accessible for the screen readers to understand that what is actually happening with the icon and what the icon represents. Maybe it is an informative icon to know. So that's a quick thing. And the role and the area live attributes might be useful in the case where icon needs to provide further information to the accessibility tree, such as if you're doing something with the loading spinner or something that is needed down in the accessibility tree. In the action icon component, we quickly see how we are doing stuff. Again, in the action icon component, we see here that icon is passed and visually the label is hidden. So wherever possible, what we are trying to do is visually hidden component is basically wrapping the information that we need to provide to the screen readers. There could be a functional image with links, which means something like this, and something is happening on this, which means we need to provide the function what this image is trying to do. That means instead of the information that it looks like an envelope, you provide that what it is trying to do. If you talk about visually hidden text and hidden icon from screen readers, you could also have an example of something like this, which means you have an action component, you're trying to go somewhere, but you're making sure that you're applying area hidden true, because this is not really required by the screen reader users, and you apply visually hidden as we saw in the previous examples. So there are several examples. Use it the right way. For purely decorative icons, I always say, for example, if you see all of these icons doesn't really make sense for the screen readers. So I would want to give them a null alt, or you could give a role presentation. Open a new link in a new tab. It's a good idea. Yes. Visually, you already know that something is opening in a new tab, and it's a new link. But to assistive technology users using screen readers, it's very important that a warning is spoken, or maybe a visual warning in the text that this link is kind of opening in a new tab, which means my component would look something like this. I have an a href and svg here, and I have a visually hidden span saying that it opens in a new tab. So creating accessible animations, yes, definitely animations are good. I'm a big fan of animations, but used properly, I believe they add tons of value to the user experience, but at the same time might not be good for some people, some folks, because the motion can trigger physical symptoms like nausea or dizziness. And also you would not want to give that symptoms to anyone. So have an option. Uh, it's popularly called as reduced motion. It's also there in all of your OSs. For example, you could just go to your OS and switch it on, and all of your animations would not happen on that page. Or you could or we could prefer writing a media query, because we have like a preferred reduced motion. So anything you put inside it, and you could have like a toggle saying that, okay, I want my animations to be stopped, and you're serving a right purpose. And maybe there are users who you are serving, and it might be a good idea to do it. Although here you see we are starting from the point where we are enabling the animations and then trying to turn off. What I like to do is the other way around. You sort of make sure that there's no animations happening at all, and then if needed, you sort of make it happen. So you basically write a reverse code. There's a good article by Josh mentioning the same thing, how and why you should use it. So be careful when you animate, provide options, or use user control system preferences, which is already there in most of the OSs, for example, Mac, or if you're trying and using Windows, probably there as well. There's a good talk by Valhad about inclusion motion, and definitely worth watching. Some development and testing tools and some linting. I would say JSXLI is one of the tools that I would recommend everyone. It statically checks for accessibility mistakes. Use it. Uh, there's something called as React X, which I always prefer. What it does, it pops up all the issues in your console, and you have to fix it. There's no option. There's something called as Agnostic X as well. Go and check it out. It works the same way as React X works. There's Pelly, which is an automated testing tool. As a starter, you could just go and start testing it, start running the commands on your terminal, and you could see all of the warnings, all of the notice, that will help you fix your accessibility issues. Some sanity checks that I always try and do is using all of these tools that is already present to us, and have like a dark mode or light mode. Make sure that the button and the label content is descriptive. Make mechanism to pause the background. Make sure you have sufficient contrast ratio, which is a very important stuff. Animations are subtle. Don't make it too much fleshy. Respect motion preferences. Our content is readable. Live captioning wherever needed. Remove the animations when the reduce motion setting is activated. You can have like a toggle. Make sure you are compliant with WCAG 2.1 conformance. I mean, at least try to achieve there. I mean, we all are doing our day jobs, but make sure, let's try and achieve that. Try and test your tools with JAWS, NVDA, voiceover, keyboard access. Make sure that it serves it is accessible in all the modes. The simulate vision in the Chrome DevTools, which you could use. I mean, it simulates your vision, and you could see that with your website. So definitely worth checking that. And lastly, get skilled at building accessible apps. Test, test, and test. I also wrote a book. So if you're interested, you could just go and check it out. Definitely. And that's it. Thank you so much. It was lovely speaking.
Manjula, thank you so much. We appreciate that presentation. So we do have a few questions, hoping you can answer. First one that came in, what is the benefit of a fragment over a div?
So when you use a sort of fragment, it doesn't actually take in your DOM. I mean, there's not an invalid thing in your DOM. When you use a div, there is an extra element that is generated in your DOM, which you shouldn't, because I remember, when we kind of started with React, you couldn't return multiple components, multiple child components from your render method, and that is why you used to wrap it with div. But that is not the case with fragment now. It doesn't create an extra element in your DOM. Instead, it just wraps your DOM. So, having an unnecessary div is not a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Next question that came in, does React provide some sort of better or easier linking between related elements, in parentheses, they have label for HTML, element described by, etc., without having to manually put handcrafted IDs on related elements everywhere manually? What's the best practice to implement?
Mm-hmm. So the question revolves around using area described by, right?
Yes, that was one of the elements that they referenced.
Mm-hmm. So I always prefer using area described by when you want to give more information about the field that you're working on. And this could be only for the screen readers, because this information is relevant for them and they would want to know more about that field, which as a visual user, you might not need. So it makes more sense to use area described by there.
Okay. Can you talk about the pros and cons of validating fields and providing error feedback on blur versus only on submit?
Yes, sure. I mean, definitely on blur, when you're trying to move the focus outside, I mean, it depends where you're trying to use the error. Sometimes you want to show the error on submit and sometimes on blur. So I would say it's totally on the use case, because sometimes you would want to see the error on submit because you fill up the entire form, you press submit, and you see the errors. But sometimes you might want to see when you were moving out of that field, you would want to see the errors.
Okay. On a single page application, when you change to another route, should the focus start at the content level, bypassing the header navigation?
So this is actually a good question. uh, I always prefer focusing the main content of your page. So if you're moving from one page to another, it makes sense to to put the focus on the main content of your page, which might be navigation, which might be a main section of your page in some cases. And this could be, this could vary from page to page. So always make sure that the user is focused on the main section of the page.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Or
Next
the head,
question. I'm sorry, what's that?
or the header. For example, you could have like a header section, and this needs to be, conveyed to the screen reader user. So you could just focus on the header.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. What do you do if the library that you rely on has an accessibility defect? And specifically, they're thinking of a well-documented X error for a specific material UI component.
If I always go with the fact that if you're trying and using some library, make sure that it is accessible and then you're trying to use it. And if it is not, I mean, you could create a custom library in-house and use it.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're going to recall this, but you had referenced a book or article at around halfway through your presentation. Do you recall what
Yeah.
that was?
Yes. I can post it in the chat if you want. It's web a11y101.com.
Excellent. Thank you for that. You also referenced Pally. What does Pally do? What are the differences between some of these tools that you mentioned?
So it's same as that, but only difference is you could just run this in your terminal and see a lot of stuff that you could easily fix it.
Okay, just a few more here. Any tips, links, or articles for applying progressive enhancement in React? such as when using SSR. For example, ensuring a form has an action by default and only adding an on submit if JavaScript is enabled and working.
Uh, I would say yeah, when you're dealing with SSR, yes, often there are problems. So what you could do is to improve it, you could also have a support of not of making it available when there is no JavaScript, so that you could have like both of them. And yeah, I mean, I hope this answers the question.
Okay, we've got one last question here. Should you use skip links to skip over long lists?
Yes, definitely. I mean, to me, it looks if you are starting your page and if a screen reader is trying to navigate through it, and if you have like a huge list of things link in your header, just provide a link saying that skip to main content. I mean, in fact, Twitter or some other websites also have a option to go directly to skip to footer or skip to something else, and this could be more on your product side or more on your side. You want to make it more granular.
Great. And right before we wrap the session, we did get another question that just came in. React apps with internal navigation and updates are full of ARIA live regions, as they often tend to be updated without reloads. How should that situation be handled? Should the whole app, some parts, be marked as live regions?
Yes, I mean, sorry, when you're using area live, yes, you should be careful of using them only on the view that you want to update it and not reload the page, for example. So yes, that's a very good idea of, I mean, reloading the whole page doesn't really make sense because you're using a single page app and you're ruining the whole idea of using the single page app. So yes, I'll make sure that you are applying it to the section where you need it.
Fantastic. We appreciate everyone's questions. Manjula, we really appreciate your time for great presentation and great session. And again, thanks to everyone for attending. Enjoy the rest of AxCon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.